Welcome to CompuScholar's Professional Development webinar for January 2024. Today we're going to be talking about project documentation templates. And specifically, we'll review simple templates that your students can use to create great requirements documents, design documents, and test plans. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about project documentation. We'll briefly cover when and why students would want to create these documents, and then we'll look at example templates for requirements documents, design documents, and test plans. So most of our courses contain either midterm or final projects, which encourage students to use a simple waterfall model for development. This means that instead of just sitting down and starting to write code, students will carefully go through a number of phases that are designed to produce better results. And software engineers will often do the same thing. There are a number of different ways that software engineers can sit down and plan out their projects. And in a simple waterfall model, there are really four main phases. There's a requirements phase where you sit down and think about what you're going to write and what requirements it needs to meet. There's a design phase where you figure out exactly how you're going to meet those requirements. There's an implementation or a coding phase where you actually sit down and create the program based on your designs and your requirements. And then there's a testing phase where you go through a careful test plan to make sure that your program meets all of the requirements. And this is usually an iterative process, so if the testing phase finds problems, those problems will be fed back into the requirements, the design, or the implementation phase in order to be corrected. Of course, there are many other development models out there that professionals will use, but all of them typically have phases in some form or fashion that are somewhat familiar. So for our courses, we're certainly not trying to get students to produce professional documentation that is identical to what a software engineer would produce in a real job. We're just trying to get them used to the idea of writing out some plans and keeping track of things on paper before they just sit down and start hacking and slicing with their code. So these project document templates that we're going to look at here in a moment are deliberately simple for students, and so a professional document would have a number of additional sections and requirements. And these documents are also deliberately flexible. We know that your students have a wide variety of capabilities. Some of them are younger and perhaps can't write as much, while your older students may be more comfortable writing longer reports and paragraphs. So you can definitely tune these documents to meet the needs of your students. We will have all of these document templates available in a Microsoft Word format, so there'll be a little zip file that you can download on our webinars page. So go take a look at that, and you can always download these document templates and then freely use them and customize them for your classroom. Okay, let's check out some of these templates. So we're looking at a Microsoft Word template for the requirements document. And the requirements document is usually the first one that the students will write when they sit down and start to brainstorm what they want to do for their project. So the template has the project name at the top, requirements document, and then author, version, and date. And again, as you sit down and you go through this requirements phase, normally you'll go through a number of drafts. Sometimes you'll pass these between teammates. So it's often helpful to keep track of the version and the date of the document that you're looking at the top. Next, we've got a summary and description. So we're looking for students just to write a brief, perhaps one paragraph summary and description of what the project's all about. And then the next section is more of an overview section where they go into a little bit more detail and they start to draw some pictures and some diagrams of, exactly what's the major point of the program, what's it going to do, what are the major scenes, how is it going to flow from page to page. So whether this is a software program or a website or a video game, you can create some storyboards, you can create some site maps, and you can kind of mock up the major features of your program and give the reader some idea of what it's all about. Next are detailed requirements and use cases. So here's where the student will drill into some more detail and provide as much specifics as they can about exactly how the program will behave, how the different features of the program will work. If they've created a video game, then perhaps what are the detailed game rules and ways that all of the features interact with each other. They can also provide use cases. So a use case is something where you kind of tell a little bit of a story about a user that's going to go in and do something within the program or the website or the game. Here's what the user is going to do, here's what they should see, here's the reaction, here's the state of the system afterwards. So that's a simple use case. Next, there may be some what we call non-functional requirements. So these are requirements that are perhaps not directly related to the program itself, but it may be more along the lines of what technology should we use, what operating systems is it going to run on, what language do we want to write this in, are there particular time constraints that we're under, Do we have a certain number of people that we can work with? Do we have a certain budget that we're trying to meet? So all of those things can go into the non-functional requirements. And then depending on the project, you may have one or more appendices, and these are of course optional. And so an appendix is the same as you would find in any other document. It's a section of additional detail that perhaps doesn't quite fit into the main flow of the document, but you wanted to provide that for some references. On this last page, we do list a few sections that are typically omitted for student work, but you might find these in a professional document. So you might find a formal table of contents, a glossary, some external citations or references, and then some business factors, perhaps some notes on market conditions or competition or other reasons why the program is coming into being in the first place. Okay, we've switched over to our design document template, and again, you'd put the project name at the top, author, version, and date, and then the one thing added here would be a reference to the requirements document. So is this design document based on a particular version of the requirements document that was written? Again, a brief overview and background, including anything that will help the reader understand the design or where you're coming from, so just a brief introduction. And then what we call a high-level system design. So this is a big picture view of how the program will be implemented. You might have some big system diagrams, a sketch of the major objects that you plan to write and the relationship between the objects. If there's additional wireframe mock-ups of the main screens or any sort of flow charts that you want to add, this would be a great place to do it. And the high-level system design can also break the system down into smaller subsystems. So then once you get into the detailed design is really treating a specific object or a specific subsystem and is providing as much information as possible on the data and the functions and so forth that will go into those particular components. So you might have input and output specifications, a GUI specification, and that sort of thing. The design document may also want to include some dependencies and milestones, so perhaps you plan to do the development in certain stages where after a certain stage you can stop and test what you've gotten before you go on to the rest of the project. There also might be some timelines that you need to meet or some things that you're waiting on from other people, so you'll lay that out in the dependencies and milestones sections. And then of course an appendix at the end, just like above. You might have some really detailed input and output information or something like that that doesn't necessarily fit into the main flow. We've listed the other typical sections again that you don't normally see in student work: the table of contents, the glossary, and external references. Risks and constraints would be things that you're worried about that might impact your development. And then you may also additionally select a software design process and talk about how you're going to do agile methodology or extreme programming or whatever the case may be. We typically just walk students through a simple waterfall model, but again, there are many, many other software design life cycles out there that could be used. So lastly, we have a template test plan, so author, version, date, and for the test plan, again, a reference to the requirements document and a reference to the design document. So the test plan can contain tests that test specific things about the requirements or the design. Overview and scope, again, brief introduction, and set expectations as to who's going to run the tests and how they're going to run the tests and when those tests will be run. And then you just go into a series of test cases. So you might have a list of test cases for a particular requirement or a particular design feature, and each one of those test cases should have a name, a brief description, and then pre and post conditions. So preconditions would kind of list the state of the system before the test is run. So if you need to log in and navigate to a certain page, for example, that would be a precondition. And then a post condition would be a description of what should have happened after the test case is completed. What's the state of the system? What should the user see? What data should have been updated, and that sort of thing. And then the test specification itself is the detailed description of exactly how you're going to run the test. I'm going to log in, I'm going to click here, I'm going to enter these 3 words, I'm going to press the left arrow key, whatever the case may be. You'll specify the test here so that if possible, you could hand this document to somebody else and they could actually run the test successfully. So that's the goal of the test specification. And then you would just have however many test cases you needed for that particular requirements or design feature. And then, of course, you would go to the next one. So most programs or websites or games will have a number of requirements, a number of design features that you're going to want to test. So you just create groups of test cases for each one of those. And this is pretty simple and straightforward. The last thing we've included in this document is a test results sheet. So these tests actually will be run over and over again. This is an iterative process, so when the students complete their first draft of the project, they'll run through the test cases, And for each test case, you've got a number, a name, and then just a note whether or not it passed. And if it failed, you might want to describe, here's what I actually saw instead. So here's the error, or here's the bug, and you would enter that into the notes. And this test sheet can be printed off a number of times, and the students can run these tests as many times as needed, and then they have a physical record of the results, or an electronic record of the results, that they can hand back to the developers or back to the people that are doing the coding in order to get the things fixed. So this is the test results sheet. Okay, so that's a quick walkthrough of our 3 project documentation templates. Again, they're very simple and flexible and tuned for students. And you can download a zip file that contains Microsoft Word documents for all 3 templates from our webinars page. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us through our website, by email, or by phone. Thanks for watching.